In the 1900s there was a family in Kansas who started murdering people who stopped in their inn. They soon got the nickname the Bloody Benders. The cult-like family began to build their homes in a 160-acre section of the western slopes. The property was located directly on the Osage Mission Independence Trail that operated from Independence to Fort Scott. John Bender's son chose a narrow piece of land just north of his father's. However, he never lived on his claim nor made any improvements. The family soon built a small one-room framed cabin, a barn, and a corral and dug a well. Inside the wooden cabin, the area was partitioned with a large canvas, creating living quarters in the back and a small inn and store in the front. A crude sign was hung above the front door that advertised groceries to the many travelers along the Osage Trail. The little store carried a few supplies such as powder, shot, groceries, liquor, and tobacco, sold meals, and provided a safe overnight resting place to the strangers along the road. The daughter, Kate Bender, desired notoriety and often advocated free love and justification for murder in her lectures. Along with her desire for fame, she also craved wealth and position. Though her beauty and social skills gained popularity with the locals, her actions began to cause them to say she was satanic. It was to be this diminutive Bender family member that would take most of the blame for what was soon to be found out about this infamous family. When the Benders opened their store and inn in 1871, many travelers would stop for a meal or supplies. However, some of those men, who frequently carried large sums of cash with the intention of settling, buying stock, or purchasing a claim, began to go missing. When friends and family began to look for them, they could trace them as far as the Big Hill country of southeast Kansas before finding no trace of the lost traveler. These first few missing travelers did not raise an overall alarm in the area, as it was not uncommon for men to continue their journey westward during those days. However, as more time passed, the disappearances became more frequent, and by the spring of 1873, the region had become strife with rumors, and travelers began to avoid the trail. When neighboring communities started to make slanderous insinuations, the Osage Township called a meeting held at the Harmony Grove Schoolhouse in March to see what, if anything, could be done. About 75 people attended the gathering, including both Bender men. The discussion began regarding the 10 people who were reported missing, including a well-known independence physician named Dr. William H. York. With the full realization that there was a major problem in their township, the group decided to search every farmstead between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek. The Benders remained silent when most of the attendees volunteered to have their premises searched. Sometime later, Billy Toll, a neighbor of the Benders, noticed that the Bender Inn was abandoned and their farm animals unfed. Toll reported the news to Leroy F. Dick, the township trustee, and a search party was soon formed, which included Dr. York's brother, Colonel A.M. York, of Fort Scott. When the men arrived at the property, they found the cabin empty of food, clothing, and personal possessions. A terrible smell inside the abandoned inn also met them. A trapdoor, nailed shut, was discovered on the cabin floor. Prying it open, the men found a 6-foot-deep hole filled with clotted blood, causing a terrible odor. However, there were no bodies in the hole. Finally, the men physically moved the entire cabin to the side and began to search beneath, but no bodies were found there either. Continuing, they began to dig around the cabin, especially in an area the Benders had utilized as a vegetable garden and orchard. At the side of a freshly stirred depression in the earth, they found the first body, buried head downward with its feet scarcely covered. The corpse was that of Dr. William H. York, his skull bludgeoned and his throat cut from ear to ear. Digging continued the next day. 9 other bodies and numerous dismembered body parts were found, including a woman and a little girl. The burial site was christened Hell's Half-Acre, and another brother of Dr. York, a lawyer and state senator residing in Independence, offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to the Bender family's arrest. On May 17, Governor Thomas Osborne added to that amount by offering a $2,000 reward for the apprehension of all 4. Word of the gruesome murders spread fast, and thousands of people flocked to the site, including news reporters from as far away as New York and Chicago. The Bender cabin was ripped apart by gruesome souvenir hunters right down to the bloody bricks that lined the cellar. Bit by bit, the story of the Benders was pieced together. The Benders were not what they appeared. They weren't even a true family. The only ones related were Ma and Kate Bender. When the visitors stopped for a meal, they were seated at a table with their backs to the large canvas separating the inn from the living quarters. Then Kate would begin to charm the men with her social skills, flirting, or revealing her psychic gifts. As the men gave their full attention to the alluring Kate, Pa and John Bender, hiding behind the canvas, would strike the unsuspecting traveler in the skull with a hammer. Ma Bender and Kate would then rifle the body for money, pushing him through the trapdoor into the hole below the cabin, where Kate would slit his throat. The body would then be buried in the garden behind the house during the night. Their downfall was the murder of a father and daughter named Launcher, and Dr. William York, who had come looking for the missing pair. In the winter of 1872, Mr. Launcher and his daughter had left Independence for Iowa but were never heard from again. In the spring of 1873, Dr. York took it upon himself to look for the Launchers, stopping at the homesteads along the trail to ask questions. Though he reached Fort Scott unscathed and started to return to Independence on March 8, he never reached home. Dr. York had two brothers, one living in Fort Scott and the other in Independence. Both knew of his travel plans, and when he failed to return home, an all-out search began for the missing doctor. Colonel A.M. York, leading a contingency of some 50 men, began questioning every traveler along the trail and stopping at the area homesteads. One of those places was the Bender Inn. The Benders tried to help by admitting that Dr. York had stopped at their place but convinced the search party that he had left and was probably waylaid by Indians. Even with her clairvoyant abilities, Kate attempted to search for the missing doctor to throw any suspicion off herself. After Colonel York's visit and the meeting at the Harmony Grove schoolhouse, the Bender family fled. Only a few days later, the homestead was found abandoned, and the search party began to discover the grisly remains of the bodies. The diggers were astounded to find what would become known as one of America's first mass murder burial grounds, as body after body was uncovered. 10 bodies were found in the Bender's apple orchard, including Dr. York and the people he had been searching for, Mr. Launcher and his daughter, just 7 or 8 years old. More gruesomely, though the little girl's body was found to have multiple injuries, none of them would have caused death, and it was speculated that the poor lass may have been buried alive. Other bodies found in the garden were those of Henry Mackenzie's mutilated remains, 3 men by the names of Ben Brown, W. F. McCready, and John Geary, as well as an unidentified male and female. Johnny Boyle's body was found in the well. Dismembered parts of several other victims were also discovered but could never be identified. 4 other bodies with crushed skulls and slit throats were also found outside the property in Drum Creek and on the surrounding prairie. As word of the grisly murders spread, more and more travelers came forward to tell their own stories of a narrow escape, including one gentleman named William Pickering. When he refused to sit with his back to the canvas because of its disgusting stains, Pickering said that Kate Bender threatened him with a knife, so he fled the premises. A Catholic priest said he fled when he saw one of the Bender men concealing a large hammer. Though the tales of what happened to the Benders can only be speculated as to their accuracy, the fact that 10 bodies were found on the property is not disputed. Other corpses found in the area and the many mysterious disappearances of other lonely travelers led the locals to believe that the Benders killed more than 20 people. The sensational tales and rumors of the Benders continued well into the 20th century, but what happened to them remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the Old West.